Hey little dreamers! Ready for a magical bedtime adventure? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a sleepy tale. Let's go! Once upon a time, in a small, sleepy village nestled in the heart of a vast kingdom, there lived a boy named Nico. Nico wasn't like the other children. While most of the boys in the village spent their days running through the fields, pretending to be knights with swords made of sticks, Nico was different. He loved the idea of being a knight, but he wasn't loud or brave like the heroes in the stories. Nico was soft-spoken, often too shy to speak up in front of others, and his hands seemed to fumble at every attempt to be the strong, fearless knight he dreamed of becoming. He wasn't very tall, and his body seemed too small for all the grand armor and weapons he imagined himself wearing. Instead of rushing into battle with swords raised high, Nico would trip over his own feet, causing everyone to laugh. His friends would say, "Nico, you'll never be a knight. You're too clumsy. You're too quiet." Nico's cheeks would turn red, and he would look down, wishing he could disappear into the ground beneath him. It was as if he could never quite measure up to the knights of his imagination, the ones who were strong, courageous, and unafraid. Still, Nico held on to the dream. Every day after finishing his chores, he would practice with a wooden sword he had made himself, trying his best to mimic the knights he admired. He would stand in front of a dusty mirror in his small room, raising the sword high and pretending that he was the hero of some grand adventure. But in the quiet of his room, Nico would always sigh. Even when he gave his best effort, it never seemed enough. One warm afternoon, as Nico wandered through the village, lost in his thoughts of knights and glory, he spotted something unexpected. There, leaning against a tree, was an older man dressed in a suit of armor. But this was no polished, shining armor. The man's armor was dented, crooked, and covered in patches. It was the kind of armor you'd expect from a knight who had seen countless battles, yet it looked worn and tired. The knight's face was rugged, with a scruffy beard and eyes that had seen too much of the world. Nico hesitated for a moment, unsure whether the man would even speak to him, but something about the old knight's calm presence made him curious. Nico approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Excuse me, sir," Nico began, his voice soft. "Are you a knight?" The man looked down at Nico, his eyes twinkling with a kind of wisdom that only age could bring. "I was a knight, lad," he replied, his voice deep and gravelly. "I am Sir Cedric, and this," he gestured to his crooked armor, "is the armor of a knight who's lived through many battles." Nico's eyes widened in awe. Here, right before him, was a real-life knight. Even if his armor wasn't perfect, he could see that Sir Cedric had the kind of bravery that Nico had always admired. Sir Cedric smiled, noticing Nico's curious gaze. "You know, lad," he continued, "being a knight isn't about how loud you are or how perfect your armor looks. It's about what's inside." Nico didn't quite understand, but there was something in Sir Cedric's tone that made him believe. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something that would help Nico become the knight he had always wanted to be. The days that followed Nico's meeting with Sir Cedric felt like a dream. Every morning, Nico would rush to the village square, eager to meet the old knight and begin his training. Sir Cedric didn't have much to say at first. He simply observed Nico as he fumbled with his wooden sword, offering quiet advice whenever Nico made a mistake. At first, Nico's movements were slow and awkward. The sword felt heavy in his hands, and he stumbled more than once, causing Sir Cedric to chuckle softly. But there was no mockery in the old knight's laugh, only patience. "You're trying too hard to be perfect, lad," Sir Cedric would say. "A knight doesn't become great by being flawless. They become great by trying again, even when they fail." Nico wasn't used to hearing such encouraging words. The other children in the village had always teased him, saying he was too weak or too soft to be a knight. He wasn't used to hearing anyone speak to him with such kindness. As the days passed, Nico started to look forward to these training sessions. With each swing of his sword, he felt a little stronger, a little more confident. One afternoon, Sir Cedric decided it was time for Nico to learn something more than just swordplay. They sat beneath the old oak tree, Sir Cedric's crooked armor catching the light of the setting sun. The village was quiet around them, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves. "Do you know what makes a knight truly brave?" Sir Cedric asked, his voice gentle but steady. Nico shook his head, unsure of the answer. He had always thought that bravery meant being strong and loud, like the knights in the stories. The ones who fought battles and won victories, who always seemed so confident and fearless. "Bravery is not about shouting your name or swinging your sword the hardest," Sir Cedric continued. "Bravery is about doing what's right, even when it's hard. It's about having the courage to help others, to stand up for what's good, even when no one is watching. It's about kindness, lad." Nico's brow furrowed in confusion. Kindness. Wasn't being a knight about being strong and fearless? He looked at Sir Cedric's crooked armor, worn and patched, and wondered how kindness could be part of it. Sir Cedric must have noticed the doubt in Nico's eyes. He smiled and placed a hand on Nico's shoulder. "True strength doesn't come from the sword, lad. It comes from the heart." Nico thought about this for a long time, sitting quietly beneath the oak tree. He hadn't fully understood what Sir Cedric meant, but something about the old knight's words felt right. Perhaps being a knight wasn't about being perfect. Perhaps it was about something deeper, something inside him that he hadn't yet discovered. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Sir Cedric stood up and patted Nico on the back. "Tomorrow we train again," he said with a wink. "But remember, lad, the best knights aren't those who fight the hardest. They're the ones who always try their best." Nico smiled, feeling something new stir inside him. It wasn't the loud, brash courage of the knights he had imagined. It was quieter, gentler, but still strong. And for the first time, Nico believed that maybe, just maybe, he could be that kind of knight. The next few days were filled with small victories and quiet lessons. Nico wasn't always graceful with his sword, but he began to understand the rhythm of it. Each swing, though still a little awkward, became more fluid, more purposeful. Sir Cedric never rushed him, always telling Nico to take his time and focus on the basics first. "The strength of a knight doesn't come from speed or strength alone," Sir Cedric would say, "but from patience, from taking each step slowly and surely." One morning, Sir Cedric brought something new for Nico to learn. "Today," he said, "you'll learn about defense. A knight must know how to protect himself before he ever strikes a blow." Nico's heart raced with excitement. Defense. This was something he felt he could manage. He had always been more cautious than aggressive, always thinking before acting, and maybe, just maybe, this was a skill he could excel at. They stood in the village square, Nico holding his wooden sword as Sir Cedric showed him how to hold his shield. Nico's eyes widened when he saw it. It was small but sturdy, made of wood and leather, with a simple design. It was nothing like the shiny, grand shields he'd seen in books, but it felt right in his hands. Sir Cedric explained the importance of positioning, the way a shield should always be held to protect vital areas of the body. Nico nodded, taking in every word. For hours, Nico practiced holding the shield correctly, blocking imaginary strikes in the air. His arms grew tired, but Sir Cedric never let him rest for too long. "Strength comes from endurance," the old knight would say, And so does courage. It's not about how hard you fight, but how long you can stand. Nico's muscles ached and sweat beaded on his forehead, but with every practice swing, he felt himself growing stronger. It wasn't just his body that was growing stronger. It was his confidence, too. As he blocked more and more imaginary strikes, he began to feel a sense of pride. He wasn't perfect, but he was learning. And that, in itself, was something to be proud of. At the end of the day, Sir Cedric stood behind him, watching Nico's exhausted form with a quiet smile. "You've done well, lad," he said, resting a hand on Nico's shoulder. "You've learned more than just defense today. You've learned perseverance. You've learned that even in the face of difficulty you keep going. And that's the true measure of a knight." Nico smiled, the weight of Sir Cedric's words sinking in. He had expected to learn how to be a knight by being strong, by wielding a sword and striking hard. But what he was learning instead was that being a knight was about much more than that. It was about standing strong when things got tough, about holding your ground when others might have given up. That night, as Nico lay in bed, the moonlight spilling through his window, he thought about all the lessons Sir Cedric had taught him. He thought about the crooked armor, about how Sir Cedric had worn it proudly, despite the dents and scratches. Nico smiled to himself. Maybe it wasn't the perfect knight who mattered most after all. Maybe it was the one who kept trying, even when it wasn't easy. The next challenge came sooner than Nico expected. It was a bright, clear day, and Sir Cedric had decided it was time for Nico to face a test. Nico had been practicing with his sword and shield for weeks now, and though he wasn't perfect, he had improved. Still, he had no idea what kind of test Sir Cedric had in mind. "You've learned the basics," Sir Cedric said one morning, looking down at Nico with a serious expression. "Now it's time to see if you can put them to use. Today, I'm going to give you a real challenge." Nico's heart skipped a beat. A real challenge. He wasn't sure he was ready for that, but he didn't want to show his fear. "What do I have to do?" he asked, trying to sound confident, even though his stomach was tied in knots. Sir Cedric didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for Nico to follow him. They walked down the winding path that led out of the village and toward the forest, where the trees were thick and the air smelled of pine and earth. Nico tried to steady his breathing as they walked, wondering what kind of test awaited him. Finally, they arrived at a clearing in the forest, where Sir Cedric stopped and turned to face Nico. "In this forest, there are many paths," Sir Cedric explained. "Some lead to safety, others to danger. Your task today is to find the safest path and make it back to the village without getting lost. Along the way, you may face obstacles, but remember what I've taught you. Use your shield to protect yourself and your sword to guide your way." Nico's heart raced. This wasn't a simple training exercise. It was a real test of everything he had learned. He looked at Sir Cedric, who gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, lad," Sir Cedric said. "I won't let you face anything too dangerous. But this is a test of your courage and your ability to make decisions. Stay calm, use your head, and you'll be fine." With a deep breath, Nico nodded. He couldn't back down now. Sir Cedric handed him a small map of the forest and told him to start at the edge of the clearing. Nico looked down at the map, trying to remember everything Sir Cedric had taught him about being alert and aware of his surroundings. He tucked the map into his pocket, gripped his sword and shield, and stepped forward, ready for the challenge. The forest was quiet except for the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling underfoot. As Nico walked deeper into the woods, he kept his eyes peeled for any signs of danger or obstacles. The path ahead split into two, and Nico paused. Which way should he go? He remembered what Sir Cedric had said. A knight must always trust his instincts. Nico closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He opened them again and stepped to the right, the path that seemed the safest. It wasn't the easiest decision, but it felt right. As Nico walked, he encountered small challenges. A fallen tree blocking his path, a steep hill he had to climb, and thick vines that tried to trip him. But each time, he used his shield to push away the obstacles and his sword to clear the way. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply took each challenge one step at a time, remembering Sir Cedric's lessons about patience and perseverance. After what felt like hours, Nico finally saw the edge of the forest. The village was in sight, and his heart swelled with relief. He had made it. When he returned to Sir Cedric, the old knight was waiting with a proud smile. "Well done, lad," he said. "You've passed the test. You've shown courage, patience, and the wisdom to make the right choices." Nico smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about being the strongest or the loudest. It was about doing his best, about showing courage when it was needed, and about trusting himself to make the right decisions. Sir Cedric clapped him on the back. "You're well on your way to becoming a true knight," he said. "And you've learned something more important than any battle skill. You've learned that courage comes from the heart, and it's always there when you need it." Nico's heart swelled with pride. He wasn't the loudest or the most confident, but he had learned that true bravery came from quiet determination, and that was enough to make him a knight in his own right. Nico's challenge in the forest marked a turning point in his journey. For the first time, he felt like he could truly become a knight. He had faced obstacles that seemed impossible at first, falling trees, steep hills, and thick vines, and yet he had overcome them all. It wasn't with brute strength or loud declarations of bravery. It was through quiet determination, patience, and trusting in the lessons Sir Cedric had taught him. But it wasn't just the physical obstacles that Nico had to face. It was the internal ones too. The doubts, the insecurities, and the fears that always lingered in the back of his mind. Nico had learned that being a knight wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about being the strongest or the loudest. It was about being the best version of yourself, no matter how quiet, how clumsy, or how imperfect you felt. When Nico returned to the village, there was a small celebration to mark his success. The villagers had heard about his challenge and his return from the forest, and they gathered to congratulate him. At first, Nico wasn't sure how to handle the attention. He wasn't used to being the center of things, especially when it came to anything as important as being a knight. But when he walked into the village square, something had changed. The villagers looked at him differently. Instead of the teasing laughter he had once received, they now looked at him with admiration. They saw him not as the clumsy, quiet boy, but as someone who had proven his worth through quiet courage. Among the crowd, Nico spotted Sir Cedric, standing with his crooked armor and his wise smile. The old knight caught Nico's eye and gave him a small nod as if to say, "You've done well, lad." Nico smiled back, feeling a sense of pride swell in his chest. It was then that Nico realized something important. Being a knight wasn't about recognition or glory. It wasn't about receiving applause or admiration. It was about the work you put in, the perseverance you showed, and the kindness you shared with others. A knight's true worth was never measured by how loud their victories were, but by how quietly they carried themselves through the world. The next morning, Nico met Sir Cedric in the village square, ready for his next lesson. The old knight looked at him with a proud smile. "Well done, lad," Sir Cedric said. "You've shown more courage than many knights twice your size. But remember, there's always more to learn. And there will always be challenges ahead." Nico nodded, feeling the weight of the journey ahead of him. He wasn't a perfect knight yet, but he was one step closer to becoming the kind of knight he had always dreamed of. One who was brave not because of loud declarations, but because of quiet strength, kindness, and the courage to keep going. And so, Nico's journey continued, not in search of glory, but in search of the quiet, steady courage that would guide him through whatever came next. As the days passed, Nico's sense of self began to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. The villagers, who once mocked him for being too soft-spoken and clumsy, began to approach him with newfound respect. They saw him not as the shy boy who tripped over his own feet, but as someone who had earned his place in their community, someone who had shown courage when it mattered most. One afternoon, as Nico was walking through the village square, he overheard a conversation between two women. They were talking about an impending festival, a grand event that would take place in the neighboring town. The festival was known for its contests and games, and it was rumored that knights from all over the kingdom would gather there to compete. "Did you hear?" one of the women said. "They're having a jousting competition, and they're calling for anyone who thinks they can fight." Nico's ears perked up at the mention of jousting. His heart raced as he thought about the possibility of competing. He had always wanted to prove himself, but he wasn't sure if he was ready. The thought of jousting against knights who had years of experience made him feel small. Yet something deep inside him stirred, urging him to take the chance. The next day, Nico found himself standing in front of Sir Cedric, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made a decision. "Sir Cedric," Nico began, his voice soft but steady, "there's going to be a jousting competition at the festival. Do you think I'm ready to compete?" Sir Cedric studied him for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. "You've come a long way, lad," he said. "But jousting is a dangerous sport, and it requires more than just courage. It requires experience, skill, and strategy. Are you sure you want to risk it?" Nico nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I've been practicing every day. I want to prove that I'm a knight, not just in name, but in spirit. I know I'm not perfect, but I'll give it everything I've got." Sir Cedric's expression softened, and he placed a hand on Nico's shoulder. "You've already proven your bravery, lad," he said. "But remember, being a knight isn't about winning. It's about doing your best, no matter the outcome." With Sir Cedric's blessing, Nico traveled to the neighboring town, where the festival was in full swing. The crowds were large, the air buzzing with excitement, and the sounds of laughter and music filled the streets. As Nico walked through the town, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the sight of so many knights in their shining armor, their lances poised for the competition. Despite the nerves twisting in his stomach, Nico held his head high. He wasn't here to win the competition. He was here to show what he had learned, to show that he was a knight in his own right. He wasn't loud, he wasn't perfect, but he was determined to do his best. When it was his turn to compete, Nico mounted the horse with Sir Cedric's words echoing in his mind. Asterisk, it's not about winning. It's about doing your best. Asterisk. The jousting match began, and Nico charged toward his opponent, his lance held steady in his hand. He aimed for the target with precision, but the impact was not as powerful as he had hoped. He was knocked from his horse, but as he hit the ground, he wasn't discouraged. He got back up, brushed the dirt off, and mounted his horse again, ready for the next round. Throughout the competition, Nico's focus never wavered. He wasn't the strongest and he wasn't the most skilled, but he kept going. He learned from each fall, each mistake, and he fought with the quiet determination that had always been his strength. When the competition ended, Nico didn't win any prizes. But he had earned something far more valuable: respect. The knights and villagers who had once overlooked him now saw him as a true knight, one who had the courage to try, to fail, and to keep going. Nico had proved that being a knight wasn't about perfection. It was about perseverance, kindness, and doing your best, no matter what. As Nico left the festival, his heart was full. He didn't need a trophy to know that he had succeeded. He had become the kind of knight Sir Cedric had always believed he could be. One who was brave, not because of loud victories, but because of quiet determination and the willingness to keep trying. After the jousting competition, Nico returned to the village feeling a mix of exhaustion and quiet pride. He hadn't won, but the real victory was in how he had conducted himself, without shame, without fear, and with all the courage he could muster. He had done his best. That night, as he lay in bed, the sounds of the village drifting through his window, he thought about the day and the lessons that continued to grow inside him. The following week, Sir Cedric came to visit Nico at his home. Nico had just finished his chores when the old knight appeared at the door, his crooked armor catching the light. Nico's heart leapt. He had come to talk. "Lad," Sir Cedric began, his voice warm but serious, "I've heard the stories about the joust. How you didn't win, but how you kept going despite falling off your horse. That takes something rare, something many knights would struggle to show." Nico felt a flush of pride and embarrassment. He hadn't expected to be praised. He had just been trying his best, but hearing Sir Cedric's words made him feel something deep inside. Maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path after all. "I wasn't sure I was ready," Nico admitted, looking down at his hands. "But I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it." "That's the spirit of a true knight," Sir Cedric said, his eyes twinkling with approval. "A knight is not measured by the trophies they win, but by the courage they show when it matters most. It's easy to be brave when everything is going well. But true courage comes when you get back up after falling down, when you keep trying even when the world doubts you." Nico nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of Sir Cedric's words. It was more than just being strong or skilled. It was about resilience, about the ability to keep moving forward even when things didn't go as planned. The lessons were starting to make sense, and Nico could feel himself changing. As the weeks passed, Nico's training with Sir Cedric continued. They spent hours in the village square practicing swordplay, defense, and strategy. Every now and then, Sir Cedric would share stories of his own knightly adventures, telling Nico about the challenges he had faced in his youth. Sometimes those stories seemed far away, filled with dangerous quests and distant lands. But every story had a lesson, and Nico soaked it all in. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Sir Cedric turned to Nico with a knowing look. "Lad," he said, "you've learned much from me, but there's one final lesson I'd like to teach you. It's the most important lesson of all." Nico looked up, intrigued. "What is it, Sir Cedric?" Sir Cedric smiled and placed a hand on Nico's shoulder. "A true knight is not defined by their armor or their sword. It's defined by their heart. You've learned how to fight, how to defend, and how to be brave. But never forget that a knight's most powerful weapon is their kindness and their willingness to help others. Always be humble, always be kind, and always do what's right, even when it's hard." Nico felt the weight of the old knight's words. He had always imagined that being a knight was about strength and glory, about fighting and winning. But now, with Sir Cedric's guidance, he understood that the true strength of a knight came from the heart, the courage to stand up for what was right, the humility to learn, and the kindness to help others along the way. As Nico stood in the village square that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he realized that he wasn't just a knight in name. He was a knight in spirit. And with Sir Cedric's lessons guiding him, He knew that he was ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. The next day, Nico took his place in the village, no longer as the shy, clumsy boy who had once dreamed of being a knight, but as someone who had earned his place through courage, kindness, and perseverance. The villagers who had once doubted him now respected him, not because of the title he had earned, but because of the quiet bravery he showed every day. And as Nico looked out across the village, he knew that the journey he had started with Sir Cedric was far from over. There would be more challenges, more obstacles, and more opportunities to prove himself. But no matter what happened, he had learned the most important lesson of all. True courage comes from within, and a knight is defined not by their armor or their sword, but by their heart. As time went on, Nico's reputation as a knight in spirit grew, not just in the village, but throughout the surrounding lands. His quiet courage, humble demeanor, and willingness to learn and help others began to spread. More and more people came to the village to seek his advice or to hear stories of his quiet victories, the ones that didn't make the headlines, but were felt deeply in the hearts of those around him. One crisp autumn morning, while Nico was in the village square, a messenger arrived with a letter sealed with royal wax. The messenger, a young man in a fine tunic, handed the letter to Nico. His eyes filled with awe. "Sir Nico," the young man said, bowing respectfully, "the king has heard of your deeds. He invites you to the royal court to be honored for your courage and service to the kingdom." Nico's heart skipped a beat. He had never expected anything like this. The royal court. He had imagined knights there, grand, loud warriors, not someone like him. But the king's invitation had come, and there was no turning back. Nico took the letter, his fingers trembling slightly as he read the royal seal. The next few days were a whirlwind. Sir Cedric helped Nico prepare for the journey, offering advice on what to expect at court. "Remember, lad," Sir Cedric said with a grin, "you don't have to change who you are to impress anyone. Just be yourself. The king values integrity, and you've shown that in everything you've done." With Sir Cedric's words in his heart, Nico set off for the royal court. The journey was long and filled with anticipation. The landscape changed from rolling hills to dense forests, and finally to the towering stone walls of the royal palace. When Nico arrived at the palace, he was greeted by guards in shining armor who led him through halls adorned with gold and velvet. The court was as grand as he had imagined, filled with nobles, knights, and royalty. Yet, despite the opulence and grandeur, Nico felt a calmness inside. He was ready, not because of the grand armor or the loud proclamations, but because of the quiet strength he had carried with him all along. The king, a tall man with a regal presence, sat upon a golden throne at the end of the hall. He looked down at Nico with kind eyes, as if he could already see the quiet strength that defined him. "Nico of the village," the king said, his voice carrying across the hall. "You have proven that true courage is not measured by strength alone, but by the strength of one's heart. It is for this reason that I honor you today." The king stood and motioned for Nico to come forward. Nico's heart raced, but he walked steadily, his feet moving with confidence that came from deep within. The king placed a medal around Nico's neck, a symbol of the honor he had earned. The crowd, who had been silent throughout, erupted into applause. Nico stood still, his heart swelling with pride, but it wasn't the applause that mattered most. It was the quiet knowledge that he had earned this honor not through perfection, but through perseverance, kindness, and a willingness to keep going even when things were difficult. The king turned to Nico and said, "A knight's true worth is not found in their armor or their title, but in their actions and the goodness of their heart. You, Nico, have shown the kingdom what it means to be a true knight. I hereby bestow upon you the title of knight, not because of the battles you've fought, but because of the battles you've won within yourself. Nico's eyes filled with emotion as he bowed deeply, a simple nod of thanks. The crowd cheered once more. But in that moment, Nico knew that he had achieved something far greater than any medal or title. He had become the knight he had always dreamed of, not because of what he could do, but because of who he had become. The rest of the evening was a blur of celebrations, but Nico stayed close to Sir Cedric, who smiled warmly at him. As they left the court that night, Nico looked up at the stars above and whispered to himself, "I am a knight." It wasn't a loud declaration, and it wasn't made for anyone but him. But it was the most honest and true thing he had ever said. As Nico returned to the village after receiving the king's honor, he couldn't help but feel like his journey had come full circle. The grandness of the royal court and the applause from the nobles were still fresh in his mind, but the real victory, he knew, wasn't in the medal or the title. It was in the quiet strength he had discovered within himself. He had gone from a boy who doubted his ability to be a knight to someone who had proven that true bravery came not from being loud or perfect, but from doing what was right, even when it was hard. When Nico arrived at the village, the first thing he did was visit Sir Cedric, who had been his guide, mentor and friend. Sir Cedric was waiting for him at their usual spot beneath the old oak tree, his crooked armor glinting softly in the sunlight. Nico sat beside him, a sense of peace settling over him as he took in the familiar surroundings of the village that had watched him grow. "You've done it, lad," Sir Cedric said, his voice warm with pride. "You've proven what many knights fail to see. That true courage is quiet, it's persistent, and it comes from the heart." Nico smiled and looked down at the medal around his neck. It was a symbol of his achievements, but it didn't define him the way he had once imagined it would. What defined him was his journey, the lessons he had learned, the kindness he had shared, and the courage he had shown even in the face of failure. "You always told me that it wasn't about the armor or the sword," Nico said, his voice filled with gratitude. "It's about the heart." Sir Cedric nodded, his weathered eyes gleaming with wisdom. "And you've got a heart, lad, the kind that makes a true knight. You've got the courage to keep going, even when it seems impossible. And that's what makes you a knight. Not the title, not the crown, but the way you live your life." Nico felt a warmth in his chest as he looked out at the village, his heart swelling with pride. The village wasn't filled with knights in shining armor, but it was filled with people who had their own quiet courage. And Nico realized that he was part of something greater than any royal title or competition. He was part of a community that valued kindness, perseverance, and the courage to keep going even when the world seemed against you. That night, as Nico lay in bed, he thought about the path he had taken. He had started out as a clumsy, shy boy with a dream of being a knight, and now he was something more. He was a true knight in spirit. He wasn't perfect, and he didn't have all the answers, but he had learned that the heart of a knight wasn't about perfection. It was about trying your best, being kind, and standing up for what was right no matter the odds. As Nico drifted off to sleep that night, a peaceful smile crossed his face. He wasn't the loudest knight, the most skilled, or the one who had won every battle. But he was the one who had stayed true to himself, who had never given up, and who had found his courage in the quietest of moments. And that, he realized, was enough. As the seasons continued to change, Nico found himself facing challenges that were not as simple as the ones he had encountered before. His reputation as a knight had spread, and with it came responsibilities that he hadn't expected. The village, once a peaceful place where Nico had trained under Sir Cedric's watchful eye, now looked to him for guidance. One crisp winter morning, a group of travelers arrived in the village, their faces weary and their clothes tattered. They told the villagers of a dangerous band of thieves who had been terrorizing nearby towns, stealing from the poor and causing fear wherever they went. The villagers, already nervous about the harsh winter ahead, began to whisper among themselves, wondering what they could do to protect themselves. Nico overheard their conversations as he stood in the village square, his thoughts drifting back to the lessons he had learned from Sir Cedric. He remembered the old knight's words. A true knight is not measured by their victories, but by their ability to protect and care for others. Nico didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want to fight a band of thieves or risk his life again. But the villagers needed someone to stand up for them. He looked out at the faces of the people he had come to care for, and something inside him stirred. This was his chance to prove that he was not just a knight by title, but by action. This was his moment to show that a knight's true strength wasn't just in the battles they fought, but in the way they protected those who couldn't protect themselves. Nico went to Sir Cedric, who was sitting under the oak tree as usual, his crooked armor leaning against the trunk. Sir Cedric looked up as Nico approached, his face wise and knowing. "I've been thinking," Nico began. "The travelers say there's a band of thieves nearby. The villagers are scared, and I think it's time for me to do something." Sir Cedric smiled, his eyes full of understanding. "You've already proven yourself, lad," he said. "But remember, true bravery is not in charging into battle. It's in the willingness to stand firm, even when the odds seem impossible." Nico nodded, feeling the weight of Sir Cedric's words settle in his heart. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. It was about protecting the people he cared about, no matter the risk. That night, Nico stood at the edge of the village, watching the cold moonlight reflect off the snow. He could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty that always came with danger. But he also felt something else, a quiet resolve. He wasn't going to fight alone. He would protect his village, yes, but he would also ask for help. The knights who had once laughed at him for being too quiet or too clumsy were now the very ones who looked to him for leadership. The next day, Nico gathered a group of villagers, including some of the older men who had once been soldiers and fighters. Together they set out to confront the thieves, not with swords drawn, but with determination and strategy. They knew the thieves were dangerous, but they also knew they could outsmart them with careful planning. As Nico and his group approached the thieves' hideout, he remembered Sir Cedric's teachings. A knight does not fight for glory. They fight for what is right. The confrontation was tense, but Nico's calm and strategic thinking led them to a peaceful resolution. The thieves, seeing the courage and unity in the villagers, backed down without a fight. The band of criminals was apprehended, and the villagers returned home safely, their fears lifted. That night, as Nico stood in the village square once again, he realized something important. He had always believed that being a knight meant wearing armor and fighting battles. But now he understood that a knight's true strength wasn't in their weaponry or their victories. It was in their heart, in their willingness to stand up for others, and in their ability to lead with kindness and wisdom. Nico smiled to himself, watching the villagers celebrate their safety. He wasn't perfect, but he was learning that true bravery came not from loud declarations or grand victories, but from the quiet moments when one chose to do what was right, even in the face of fear. As the stars twinkled overhead, Nico knew that his journey was far from over. There would always be challenges ahead, but he was ready. He had learned from the best, and now he knew that he didn't need a title or a crown to be a knight. He just needed the courage to keep going no matter what.